Welcome to Lesson 1 Guided Notes that covers ratios, rates, and this should say proportion. This is a review. Unfortunately, not everyone was on board when we completed our proportional relationships unit, so we want to make sure that everyone has the basics down, and so that's what this week will be about. We will be using the information this week for many lessons coming up, including 8th grade. So let's get started. This first sentence says a blank is a comparison between two quantities. There are 3 ways to write a ratio. We prefer to write ratios in fraction form. So you may have guessed already that what we need to write here is ratio. And it is true that we prefer to write it in fraction form. So if we read what's given here, 2 red marbles to 6 blue marbles could be written as, well, there's 3 ways, so we're going to go over that very briefly. We could write 2 red marbles like this, 2 with a colon and then 5. That's one way to express it. We could also write it with the word 2, but our preferred way to write it would be 2 to 5. This way we can use it just like we would use fractions. A lot of things we can do it, particularly when it's written in this form. So next, let's look at the next sentence. A blank is a ratio that makes a comparison between 2 different types of units. So what we're looking for is called a rate. A rate is a special kind of ratio. So let's read what it says here because this is an example. Maisie measures her heartbeat at 60 beats per minute. So the top part of the ratio is referring to beats, 60 beats, and the bottom part of the ratio, or the second part of the ratio, is talking about minutes. So it mentioned that there are 2 different types. So I would label this, if I wrote it, 60 beats, so I know that's what that's talking about, and 1 minute. So that's what we're going to practice doing today, is labeling these as well. Our next definition says a blank is 2 ratios that are equivalent or equal to each other. We often use a proportion to help us find an unknown quantity. In other words, solving a proportion can help us answer a question. So by now you may have guessed that this word that we're looking for is called a proportion. And it's going to help us answer a question. For our purposes right now, we're going to go ahead and practice cross multiplying. These are already set up for us. They don't tell us what these are about. This is a proportion. So if you look at this is a ratio, and this is a ratio with something unknown. So it's 2 equal ratios or equivalent ratios. So we're going to cross multiply, and I prefer to start with the butterfly wing that involves the variable. So I'm going to start right here. I'm going to make a butterfly wing here, and that means 4 times x. We use a butterfly body to recall and remind us that we have to drop down the equal. And then we're going to do the other butterfly wing. And it doesn't matter if I say 9 times 10 or 10 times 9. So once we have that set up, now we're going to go ahead and say what that's equal to. So this would be 4x equals 90. And now we're ready to solve. We're going to build our wall. For x means multiplication, so we're going to divide that 4. And we're going to divide by 4 on this side. We accomplished getting x by itself. And 90 divided by 4 would be 22 and 5/10. So that means that 4/9 is equivalent to 10 over 22 and 5/10. So we're able to figure out what should go there. The next example, once again, this is just my personal preference, but I like starting the butterfly wing where I see the variable. I personally like having my variables on the left side. It does not matter. You can do it either way. So the body means I need to drop down the equal, and the other wing tells, whoops, that's a very messy 5. Let me erase that. The other wing tells me that I'm multiplying 5 times 12. So we're going to end up with 2n equals 5 times 12, which is 60. And now we're to the dividing part. 2n means multiply, so the opposite of multiplying is dividing by 2. We do this on both sides, leaving n equals 30. Let's switch to the next page. I realize that I'm talking fast and going fast, so anytime you want, you can always go right ahead and pause the video. I'm trying to do this so that the lessons are not too long. So let's read what we have. Now let's use the next examples to demonstrate how to set up, and solve a proportion. So most of our work will be done in word problems. Example 1 says a family traveled 174 miles in 3 hours. At this rate, how many miles could they travel in 5 hours? And you're going to see a step-by-step guide how to do this. So the first thing says identify what you're trying to find and choose a variable to represent it. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to circle this. This is our first step. So as I read through this, I notice that what we're trying to find is how many miles. So I'm going to go ahead and underline that. And I'm going to tell myself this is my first step. So how many miles could they travel in 5 hours? So that's the question. But we're looking for how many miles. So I'm going to write let x, so we could choose another variable, but I'm going to go ahead with our basic x equal the number of miles. And we could continue to say that they traveled in 5 hours, but for our purposes, that will be fine. So next, you're going to notice it says set up a proportion labeling the top and bottom quantities. So there's more information that we need to use in this example. In fact, this opening statement gave us a ratio, but we want to make sure that we label it. So this is step number 2. This is information we need for step number 2. So we are going to set up 174 miles, labeling over 3 hours. And then since it's proportion, I need my equal sign, and now I have to decide what goes on top and what goes on bottom. So you notice our question is how many miles. It looks like miles is on top, so that means my variable is going to go on top. And they told me 5 hours. And if you look, sure enough, hours on bottom of the other ratio. So I'm going to put 5 hours. And shame on me, I didn't label. So we have now completed task number 2, or step number 2. Next, it asks us to cross multiply. So step number 3. I personally prefer when I'm cross multiplying to kind of get rid of the labels for just a while, but we want to leave them there so we can refer back to them. And they just are kind of in the way when I'm cross multiplying. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take 3 times x, which would be 3x. My equal sign comes down, and 174 times 5. If you want to pause and do that calculation, that's great. All right, I hope that you got 870. And now comes our solving. We're going to divide by 3, divide by 3. And now we have our x all by itself, and that leaves 870 divided by 3, which is 290. We're not quite done. Now comes the part that we are waiting for. That's the answer. So it says, state the answer to the question. So we want to make sure that we're clear now what we just answered. So step number 4 would be to go back to your question, or where you defined your variable, and now we know we're trying to find the number of miles. So we're going to write that the family could travel 290 miles. That's what we just found in 5 hours. Now we've completely answered this question. So let me pause and move example number 2. Okay, you can use the step-by-step guide above if you print it off the paper. Otherwise, I will remind you what the steps are. So example 2 says Sophia earned $480 in 32 hours. At this rate, how much would she earn if she worked 40 hours? And you may recall that our first step was to identify what the question is. So if I scan through this, I see how much would she earn. So that must be money. And it continued on if she worked for 40 hours. So we could use a different variable, but I'm going to stick with my beloved x. So let x equal the amount of money Sophia earned. So that is step number 1. We identified what the question is and we gave a variable in order to represent it for right now. Step number 2 says that we want to set up a proportion and label it. So there's important information that they told us. Whoops, I wanted this word earn too. So Sophia earned $480 in 32 hours. So that very first bit of information gave us our ratio, $480. So this is money, or we could say it's the amount that she earned over 32 hours. And now, because it said proportion, I need my equal sign. And I'm looking for the amount that she earned. And if we look, they told us hours, but they didn't tell us how much she earned. So that must be where my variable goes. We don't know how much she earned when she worked 40 hours. So everything's lined up. Earnings are on top, money's on top, and hours are on bottom. All right, so we are now to step number 3. And step number 3 tells us that we need to solve this proportion. So again, this is just my personal preference. I prefer to not have the labels when I'm trying to do the cross multiplying. I do want to do this a different way just because I don't want you to think you always have to start with a variable. I usually tend to start with this wing because as a variable. However, I do want you to know that you could start either way. Some people like to go top left to bottom right. So let's pause and take 480 times 40. We're allowed to do this either way. And then my other wing would be 32 times x. So we have 19,200 and 32x. For my students that hate seeing this variable on the other side, we can always rewrite this as 32x equals 19,200. That is a little bit messy down there. I'm going to continue here though because I want you to know you can solve this. If you have it set up this way, you have to start on the side with the variable. So that's why I'm starting on the right side. I'm dividing by 32 because I want the x by itself. And I'm going to divide by 32 on this side. And that would give me my x left on this side. And we're going to pause and take 19,200 divided by 32. And that answer is 600. So let's see what we just found. The fourth, and I'm going to go ahead and write number 4 over here. This is what we're looking for. Number 4. It says, what is the answer? So our question was, how much would she earn if she worked 40 hours? So Sophia would earn $600 if she worked 40 hours. Thank you for watching the video. Would you now go ahead and try the practice problems? Do page 1 and then please check the key for page 1 and then do page 2 and check the key. There are only about 4 or 5 problems, but we'd like you to practice and get the hang of this. Take care.